1943. At first glance, Nazi Germany still seemed invincible. Its armies occupied vast regions of Europe. Its flags remained planted in conquered territories, and millions of soldiers were still fighting far from Berlin. But behind this appearance of strength, something fundamental had changed. The war machine that had shaken the world was beginning to come into conflict with the very reality it had helped create. And the most intriguing part? Many of the men responsible for conducting that war seemed unable, or perhaps unwilling, to see what was happening. How could an army capable of winning spectacular battles be simultaneously moving toward an increasingly inevitable defeat? And why did it continue fighting in exactly the same way, even when the signs of disaster were already everywhere? To understand this contradiction, we need to dive into one of the most complex and fascinating years of the entire Second World War. When people talk about 1943, many imagine a clear turning point in the war. But the reality was far more complicated. This is not merely the year of great battles or famous defeats. It is the moment when the war continues at full intensity, while the foundations supporting the German war effort begin to slowly crumble. According to historian Robert Citino, this may be the most difficult period to interpret in the entire conflict. Not because events are lacking, but because everyone involved had already lost many of the illusions they possessed at the beginning of the war, and yet they continued moving forward as if victory was still within reach. And it is precisely this contradiction that we are going to explore. From the beginning, Germany faced a problem that could not be solved by courage, discipline, or military talent alone. It was a problem of resources. The Reich simply did not possess enough industrial, energy, and human capacity to sustain a prolonged war against several major powers at the same time. For that reason, its strategy depended on one essential condition: winning quickly. It was not a choice among many options. It was an absolute necessity. The logic was simple: defeat one enemy before another could mobilize its full potential. End campaigns in weeks or months. Prevent the war from becoming a contest of endurance. And for a time, that strategy seemed to work brilliantly. Between 1939 and 1941, each new campaign appeared to confirm that Germany had found an irresistible formula for winning wars. Poland fell within weeks. France, considered one of the great military powers of the era, was defeated with a speed that shocked the world. In the Balkans, operations advanced rapidly. Even extremely risky missions, such as the airborne invasion of Crete, reinforced the image of an army capable of accomplishing the impossible. Then came Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. In the first months, the results were astonishing. Millions of Soviet soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. Entire armies disappeared inside gigantic encirclement operations. To many observers, it seemed only a matter of time before the Soviet Union collapsed. But there was a problem hidden behind all these victories, a problem that few were willing to admit. Because while the German army was destroying enemy forces on a colossal scale, it was not solving the most important issue of the war. In fact, each new victory began to reveal an uncomfortable truth. Germany was winning battles, but that did not mean it was winning the war. And that difference would change everything. Robert Citino highlights a fundamental observation. Germany's operational triumphs were extraordinary, but they did not produce a lasting strategic solution. Enemy armies could be destroyed, cities could be conquered, territories could be occupied. None of that guaranteed that the adversaries would stop fighting, especially when those adversaries possessed far greater resources to replace men, equipment, and losses. With every victorious campaign, Germany moved closer to a dangerous paradox. The more battles it won, the more dependent it became on continuing to win without interruption. And no nation can sustain that pace forever. When 1943 began, the consequences of that problem finally started to appear. Although the map still looked impressive, the reality hidden behind it was very different. From a distance, everything seemed under control. The Germans still occupied vast regions of Europe. Their troops remained deep inside Soviet territory, The distance to Berlin was still enormous, but the numbers, the industry, and the production capacity of the Allies were already telling a completely different story, a story that few wanted to hear, and worse still, the very nature of the war was changing, a change that would strike at the heart of German strategy. In the next section, we will see how the war ceased to be a contest of rapid movement and began transforming into exactly the type of conflict Germany could never win. Germany's real problem in 1943 was not merely military, it was structural. For years, its commanders had fought a war based on speed, surprise, and maneuver. But now the conflict was becoming something entirely different, a war of attrition, and wars of attrition are not usually won by the most skillful army. They are won by whoever can keep producing tanks, producing aircraft, producing ammunition, producing soldiers. While Germany watched its resources being consumed at an accelerating pace, the Allies were finally beginning to mobilize their full industrial potential. And that gap widened month after month. Yet something curious happened. Even in the face of this new reality, the German army continued fighting as though nothing had changed. Its enemies had learned. The Soviets were no longer the same as in 1941. The British were better prepared. The Americans entered the war with an industrial capacity that was practically unprecedented. German tactics no longer produced the same impact. Encirclements became more difficult, surprises became less frequent, enemy reserves became more abundant. Even so, the German response was almost always the same: attack, counterattack, regain the initiative, launch another offensive. And that brings us to the first great symbol of this contradiction: Stalingrad. The defeat at Stalingrad shook the world. For the first time, a gigantic German force had been encircled and destroyed on a catastrophic scale. Hundreds of thousands of men were lost, equipment vanished, prestige was shattered. For many observers, that was the moment when Germany should have abandoned any illusion of victory. But exactly the opposite happened. Instead of adopting a cautious defensive posture, German commanders once again searched for opportunities to regain the initiative. And soon, one appeared: Kharkov. What happened next is one of the greatest ironies of the entire war, because just as Germany's strategic situation was deteriorating, the army demonstrated that it was still capable of executing brilliant operations. In the spring of 1943, experienced German forces launched a powerful counteroffensive. The result once again surprised the Soviets. Kharkov was recaptured. Heavy losses were inflicted on the enemy, the lines were stabilized, and for a time, it seemed that the German military machine still possessed enough energy to reverse the course of the war. But that success concealed a trap, an extremely dangerous trap. Every local victory reinforced the belief that the situation could still be saved. Every successful counterattack fueled hopes of a strategic recovery. Yet the numbers told a different story, a far less optimistic story. Robert Citino highlights a fascinating phenomenon. Operational excellence can conceal strategic failure. When an army continues winning important battles, it becomes much harder to recognize that the war as a whole is slipping out of its control. That is exactly what happened. Commanders watched their soldiers achieve impressive results. The divisions still responded effectively, counterattacks still worked, the lines still held, but at the same time, the overall balance of the war continued shifting toward the Allies. The gap between battlefield success and strategic reality grew ever wider. While fighting continued in the east, warning signs appeared everywhere else. In the Atlantic, the submarine campaign was beginning to lose momentum. For years, the U-boats had represented a constant threat to British supply lines. Now, new technologies, more effective radar systems, better organized escorts, and refined tactics were changing the game. In the skies, the situation was also deteriorating. Allied bombing campaigns increased in intensity. German cities began to feel the direct weight of the war. For the first time, the territory of the Reich no longer seemed untouchable. And this was only the beginning. To the south, the situation was worsening as well. In North Africa, German forces still demonstrated enormous tactical competence. On several occasions, they managed to inflict painful defeats on the Allies, but those victories were no longer enough to alter the final outcome of the campaign. The material superiority of their opponents was simply too great. Soon afterward, another blow would come, the invasion of Sicily, and then of Italy itself. Once again, the Germans responded with what they knew best: rapid movements, aggressive defenses, violent counterattacks. At times, they came very close to throwing Allied troops back into the sea, but each of those actions carried an increasing cost: men, fuel, ammunition, equipment, resources that Germany could no longer replace at the same speed. And then an uncomfortable question arises, perhaps the most important question of the entire year of 1943. Did German commanders truly believe they could still win, or were they simply doing what they had learned to do throughout their entire lives? Because the answer to that question reveals far more than military decisions. It reveals a mindset, a culture, an entire way of viewing war. And that is exactly what we will begin exploring in the next section. If the central contradiction of 1943 was the continuation of an increasingly unsustainable strategy, a second transformation was taking place behind the scenes. A quiet change, but an extremely important one: the change in the profile of the men commanding the war. In the early years of the conflict, many of Germany's leading generals had been shaped by the general staff tradition. They were officers trained to analyze complex situations, plan large-scale operations, and adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions. Flexibility was a virtue. Maneuver was an essential tool. Retreating when necessary was not viewed as weakness but as part of the art of war. But as the military situation became more difficult, a different type of commander began gaining influence. Not necessarily more competent, but more willing to obey, more willing to stay where he was, more willing to fight to the end. Little by little, the priority ceased to be winning through mobility. The priority became resistance, holding positions, avoiding retreats, preventing any enemy advance, even when that meant sacrificing troops that might later have been used elsewhere. The logic of the war was changing, but that change carried profound consequences, because every great military force depends on the ability to adapt, and adaptation requires freedom of decision, something that was beginning to disappear. As pressure increased, more and more rigid directives emerged from the high command. Positions were to be held, lines could not be abandoned, retreats became increasingly difficult to authorize. In theory, this appeared to demonstrate determination. In practice, it often turned entire units into fixed targets. Commanders on the battlefield saw situations changing rapidly, but their options diminished. One of the most valuable tools of war, the ability to trade space for time, was becoming restricted. And when an army loses the ability to maneuver, it begins to lose something even more important: its strategic freedom. But there is an even more uncomfortable question. Why did so many officers accept continuing down this path? The answer is not simple, and perhaps that is precisely what makes 1943 so fascinating. Many explanations have been offered over the years. Some point to fear, others to loyalty, others to ideology, but none of them, by themselves, can explain everything. Fear of the Soviet advance certainly existed. Reports from the Eastern Front fueled deep anxieties about what would happen if German territory were invaded. But that does not fully explain why so many offensives continued to be launched. There is also the figure of Hitler. Without question, his authority was enormous. His influence over the political and military system was unquestionable, but attributing all decisions solely to his presence oversimplifies a much more complex reality. Because those officers were not puppets, they were experienced men, trained, capable of understanding the situation in which they found themselves, and yet they continued. So what kept them moving forward? Part of the answer may lie in something much older than the war itself, the military culture that shaped generations of German officers. For decades, concepts such as honor, duty, discipline, and obedience occupied a central place in the professional identity of these men. They were not merely abstract values, they were the foundation of their entire formation. Many of them believed that abandoning the struggle would mean abandoning what had defined their lives. Within that logic, continuing to fight was not merely a military choice, it was a moral obligation. Even when the prospects for victory diminished, even when losses increased, even when reality became increasingly difficult to ignore. To fully understand this mindset, we must go even further back in time, to the First World War, because the scars of that conflict never completely disappeared. Many officers holding command positions in 1943 had served in the First World War, and they carried with them a powerful memory. The belief that the previous Germany had not been defeated militarily but had been abandoned from within. Regardless of the historical validity of that interpretation, it exerted enormous influence on that generation. The idea of accepting another defeat seemed unbearable. Any negotiation, any surrender, any political retreat, all of it risked being interpreted as a repetition of the past, and that further strengthened the determination to continue fighting, even when circumstances pointed toward an inevitable outcome. And here we arrive at the heart of the story. The German army of 1943 was still an extremely efficient military force. It still possessed experienced commanders. It was still capable of launching devastating counterattacks. It could still win battles, but it could no longer win the war. That is the contradiction that defines the entire year. A brilliant military machine at the operational level, but trapped within a strategic reality from which it could not escape. Every local victory consumed irreplaceable resources. Every battle won brought Germany closer to even greater exhaustion. Every display of strength concealed a growing structural weakness. It was like watching an extraordinarily skilled fighter continue landing blows while slowly losing the ability to remain standing. And perhaps that is exactly what makes 1943 so important to historians. It was not merely a year of battles. It was the moment when the logic sustaining the entire German war effort began to collide head-on with reality. And once that collision finally occurred, the outcome could no longer be avoided. When we look at 1943, we realize that history is rarely simple. German officers were not merely victims of circumstances, nor were they solely responsible for them. They were part of a complex system of beliefs, traditions, political pressures, and military decisions, a system that continued functioning even when its objectives were already becoming unattainable. And perhaps that is the main lesson of that year. Empires do not always collapse when they lose the ability to fight. Sometimes they collapse precisely because they continue fighting in the same way when the world around them has already changed completely. If you made it this far, it means you enjoy deep historical analyses that go beyond battles and explore the decisions, mindsets, and contradictions that shape the great events of humanity. So subscribe to the channel and follow the upcoming episodes, because understanding history is not merely knowing the past. It is understanding how human beings make decisions in the face of extreme situations. Thank you very much for your audience. May God bless you and your family. Until the next video.